Tēnei, ka hui tātou ki te kai kōrero tuatahi, e kōrero ana mo te tiaki. So, Tiaki Session 1, Michael Bartlett, who is speaking to the long-term monitoring myrtle rust at sites in the North Island. Michael is a researcher in the pathogen ecology and control team at Scion in Rotorua. He's a co-lead of Beyond Myrtle Rust RA 1.1, investigating the adaptive potential of Astropacina pisciti. That one, you know what it is. Michael also works with other researchers investigating myrtle rust ecology, natural enemies and options for disease management. Tēnei whakanuia, tēnei kai kōrero, Michael Bartlett.
Tēnā katoa. So my name is Michael Bartlett. I'm a researcher at Scion in the pathogen ecology and control team. And it's a privilege today to be here and be able to present some of the monitoring work that the Scion pathogen ecology control team have been doing, looking at the impacts of myrtle rust on local myrtle trees at sites in the North Island as part of the Beyond Myrtle Rust program. So we had a slide from Becky yesterday that basically covered this at the intro, but I'll quickly go over it again. Myrtle rust disease is caused by the rust fungus Ostropococcinia acidii. The rust originates from South America and affects a large number of hosts within the myrtle Myrtaceae family. The disease affects actively growing or new growth, so new leaves and stems, flowers and fruits, and it was first detected here in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2017. So before myrtle rust arrived and early on, and even now really, we were concerned about all of the native Myrtaceae here in New Zealand. But in terms of thinking about where we wanted to monitor the potential impact and what this pathogen was doing to native trees out in our environment and prioritise, using our resources, we needed to think about the species that were most likely to be heavily impacted. And it became pretty clear early on that the two species, endemic species in the Lophomirdis genus, Lophomirdis velata or ramarama at the top, and Lophomirdis obcordata or rohutu at the bottom, were highly susceptible and likely to be heavily impacted by this disease. And unfortunately, as you can see from those pictures, observations of severe infection and dieback are common in the environment for these two species. The first sort of systematic monitoring that the Scion team did at sites in Aotearoa, up near the Rotorua area, was done before I started working at Scion, and that was led by Rowan, who was here, and Becky was involved as well. That work was funded by MPI early on. At that point, myrtle rust was present at one of those sites and not present at the other, although it's present at all the sites that we're monitoring now, unfortunately. And observations even then, during the early stage, suggested that heavily infected trees were likely to die, and we were already predicting the potential for local extinction for Lophomirdis populations. And so as the funding from MPI finished and we were looking at how we might be able to extend the monitoring work that we were doing to different sites and keep that work going, monitoring at those same locations and other places in the Bay of Plenty was funded by Ngā Rākau Taketake and Scion SIF funding. And we were also able to establish some monitoring sites in the Auckland area and the Taranaki region using funding from Beyond Myrtle Rust, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. At each site, we essentially established a series of 3-metre circular plots around the focal tree, and the main assessment is on the focal tree, and then we look at presence or absence of disease on other Myrtaceae within that 3-metre plot. Essentially what the assessment looks like is looking at 5 branches, a subset of the tree in total, and then carefully examining all of those branch tips and counting the number of tips in total, how many of those have new growth, how many flower buds and flowers and fruits there are, how many of these are affected by the disease or have symptoms, and then how much dieback there is present. And you can see from the picture here, we've got 3 tips at the end of this branch, 2 of them have nice new healthy growth on them, and the one in the middle is dieback. So looking at some of the data that's come through from 3 seasons of collecting this information now, I'm starting in the Taranaki region. The green area shows the percentage of those tips on those branches where there's new growth. You can see that the trees flush earlier in the season, from October to December. The yellow area shows the percentage of those tips that are affected by myrtle rust or have symptoms. And that sort of builds up from October to peak in January and February, and then starts to decline as the availability of material to infect also declines. The red dashed line is the level of dieback. And you can see that this increases through the season, particularly early on in the first season where monitoring occurred, and then it remains higher than it was in the previous season because it died from the previous season, and also climbs as the season progresses within each season as well. So if we look at the Auckland sites, trends are kind of similar. We have one location where myrtle rust is only present at sort of low incidence. It's not actually affecting many trees, although there is a trend where more disease has been found in subsequent years, and so whether it's just taking some time for the pathogen to establish at that location and get going or not is unclear. And then the bottom graph there, we have severe disease on rohutu trees at that location. I haven't displayed data for this most recent season because intervention is actually happening at that site. I think we're going to hear from Nikki later, the fungicide being applied to the trees to protect them. But that photograph there is a photo of a rohutu at that location where no fungicide has been applied, and you can see that the trees completely defoliated. So the rust is having a real high impact on those trees. And we've seen this consistently across the sites. High levels of foliage loss and significant declines in tree health for individual trees as the disease impacts the trees year in, year out. Now, at several of the sites that we were monitoring, we are seeing cases of tree mortality, so trees are actually dying. So in addition to looking at disease impacts on local myrtles, we've been looking at co-occurring myrtles within those plots. And although there aren't many swamp mairi or mairi tawake or waiwaka trees within our sites, they are present at some of those locations. And observationally, the levels of disease can be very high and severe, similar to local myrtles, and so we're really quite concerned about mairi tawake as well. Other myrtaceae that are affected quite commonly are two of our Metrosideros climbing rata, in particular Metrosideros diffusa, although Metrosideros fulgens can be affected, although usually at fairly low severity. And one of the questions we're interested in is whether build-up of inoculum on Lophomertis causes an increased amount of disease on these co-occurring Myrtaceae. And there is some evidence to suggest that that's the case, although it's difficult to disentangle inoculum in the environment. There's a lot of trees with disease on them, and it might just be that the environmental conditions in that particular area are conducive to disease development as well. In summary, the data shows a progressive decline in tree health for Lophomertis at multiple sites in the North Island. The disease can result in host mortality for Lophomertis, and that's clear. I didn't show data for this, and it's really part of a different project that's funded by NRT, but there's also evidence that the impact on these trees reduces the reproductive output for Lophomertis as well, so it will influence the recruitment for those trees in those places as well. But reflecting on yesterday's kōrero around myrtle order, thinking about positive and what the future might hold, it is certainly possible that localised extinctions may happen in some areas for these trees. Although not all the trees are badly affected, and the disease is not as severe in some sites as it is in others, and so there is potential for resistance. And what we need to be thinking about now is what's next. And research is important, and it's good to collect this data, but we want to make sure that these trees are still here for us to conserve. So action is really needed in the near future. We're getting to that point. Thank you very much for listening, and I've got acknowledgements to make to multiple people, in particular mana whenua for each of those locations for allowing us to access the sites and do our work. Kia ora.